Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 18 of Walking Down the Warwick Road. I'm Tim. Joining me, as always, is Pete and Roy and Roger. Lads, it's been some time. I think it's been since October. I was looking back that we recorded an episode. We had a World Cup in between, and as Pete just mentioned off camera, the games for United coming thick and fast as well before the World Cup. But it's good to be back. We have a good one today. I'm really excited about this one, but how's everyone doing? Pete, how are you? It's been a while. How are things?
Well, things are well generally. What's great now, of course, is that Ten Hag seems to have sprinkled his magic on the team and got them confidence and direction. They just still need a bit of magic dust to get the flair there. But wow, we're a team that wins games confidently and comfortably, and it's looking good. Certainly on the cups front, cups plural, and I've not ruled out the league yet, Tim.
Indeed. And Roy and Roger, how are you both doing? How are you doing, Roy?
Good. Yeah, I've got one or two issues, but I think everything's going to be okay health-wise. But yeah, it's great to catch up with you three, and it's so great that by popular demand we're back here today. It's really reassuring.
Yes, indeed. And Roger, in a different setting today, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to hearing from Roy and from Pete. You know, when they were whippersnappers, you know, in their early United fanhood. So it'll be great. They were only in their 20s then, of course.
Right. I think we're all we're gonna be enjoying that. Right. We're gonna come to you in a minute, Pete, just to sort of set up the pod for us and to set things up for us going into the 64-65 season. But just a quick housekeeping note. We've made a tactical switch, a little bit of a tactical switch with the podcast in that we're no longer streaming it live, we're recording it. But we still encourage you once the episode goes live on our Twitter page, if you're watching it now, then interact with us below by replying to the video, and you can tag Roy, Pete, and Roger. They'll all be tagged in the advertisement for the video. So when you respond to us when the video goes live, we'll certainly get back to you and answer any questions or share in the memories that you do have. But we think this format will serve us well going forward. So Pete, over to you. My little boring preamble is over, and we'll come to you for setting up the season for us.
Yeah, well, today we're going to cover the 1964-65 season. So we're going back, nearly 60 years. It's the summer of 64 we'll start with, obviously. Britain was coming out of its post-war austerity. England itself was about to enter the swinging 60s. They always say England, but it should be the UK. It should be Britain, really. There was a Labour government with Harold Wilson. The Beatles and the Stones ruled the charts. And mods and rockers were battling on the beaches whenever they could. But on a football front, the big news was England had been awarded the right to stage the World Cup in '66. So there was a lot of excitement about that around. United had got one of the grounds for that World Cup, and we're building a new cantilever stand. That means no obscured views, and that would hold 10,000 people. So that was a big thing happening from '64 onwards. Busby was still rebuilding post-Munich, which had been 6 years before. He'd won the Cup in '63, which was good, but it was still on a mission to get United back to the very top in England and Europe. In '63-64, we'd finished second in the league to Liverpool, only 4 points difference, and that came down to a game we'd lost near the end at Anfield in April '64. But we'd reached the semi-finals of the FA Cup, and the quarter-finals of the Cup Winners' Cup. And United, quite tellingly, had also won the FA Youth Cup for the first time since Munich. And that had some very good players coming through. So Law had been the top scorer in '63-64, 46 goals in 30 matches in the league. Incredible. 46 goals, 30 of them in the league. An incredible run with something like, something like 9 hat-tricks he got that season. There was a young lad called Georgie Best coming through, a 17-year-old. He'd come into the team at Christmas '63. Busby had most of the pieces in place, but Giles had gone to Leeds, and it left us a bit light on the right wing. So he brought John Kennelly in from Burnley, who'd won the title with Burnley about 4 years before. and a reserve goalkeeper he brought in who would turn out to be more than a reserve keeper. So 64-65, hopes were high.
Indeed, and there's just a graphic there of the key contributors that season. I think one thing we'll see during the course of the season is Busby sort of settled into a very small select group of players who we'll see through the appearance lists. You know, it wasn't the group didn't expand in terms of appearances. Maybe Pete and Roy, and maybe you could take us through some of the early Pete, certainly your early United heroes, being at your first season, going to United, and the players that were there. You touched on some of them, but certainly some familiar names for United supporters.
I think interestingly, Pat Crennan had quickly become a hero of mine when he signed in '63. But obviously Bobby, Dennis, and then George, which was the fruition of his career. I just realised the other day I'd had the great fortune of seeing Bobby's debut versus Charlton Athletic in 1956, Dennis's debut against West Brom in '62, and George's debut against West Brom in '63.
Wow.
So I feel very fortunate to have seen those three make their Manchester United debut. What I would throw onto there is that there's two or three very unsung heroes of Manchester United. Never mind 1964-5, but Tony Dunn, one of our great left backs. David Hurd, one of our great centre forwards. I wouldn't say Nobby was unsung hero, but Nobby as well. And as Pete just mentioned, the signing of John Connolly was pivotal.
Yeah, I think Roy makes a great point there, Tim. There is, of course, when we look back in time, in history, for anything, not just football, we just tend to capitalize something that was very memorable for the, I mentioned the Beatles and the Stones, but there was the Kinks in the charts and the Yardbirds and lots of others. But you captured a few. Bestlaw and Charlton, the Holy Trinity, always get mentioned, and rightly so. They were three cherries on a wonderful cake. 3 Ballon d'Or winners in one team for the 10 seasons, unprecedented and not happened since. But there was you don't have the 4 years that United were about to have with just 3 great players. And David Hurd and John Connelly making up a very good forward line, and stalwarts like Credden and Styles and Fowkes, all of them, in fact, they were all champions and they were all heroes, Tim, because this was my first season. So I embraced all of them. It was just magic. It was like a kid under the tree at Christmas, loving all his presents, not just one in particular.
Indeed, we'll put the slide up again just before we get into phase one. Come to Roger for phase one. I'm going to put this slide up, and we will put it up again. But here's the appearance leaders for that season. Just an incredible amount of games played that season. And like we were saying earlier and leading up to the show, is that it really settled into a side in a select group of players that were picked for the majority of the games that season. Of course, total appearances in the league, the FA Cup. Go ahead, Roy.
Dennis Law, of course, and it will come to that later on, but receives a 6-week suspension around Christmas. In those days, they were week suspensions, not certain matches. But he must have missed 4 or 5 games. So if you add 4 or 5 onto his total, there's another one in the 40s.
Yeah, indeed.
It was, Tim, as you say, an incredibly small squad. I mean, there were other players, but nobody else off that list played more than 6 matches. And so you've got that 11 there were the ones that played all season, but that season, 60 competitive games was the most United had ever played in their history up to that point 60 competitive games in the season. And I think that would stand till well into the. I know Fergie's team played 66. Mourinho's team in 17 played 64. But we've only had a few seasons where we've played more than 60 in those years since. And when you think how many matches come with the Champions League, it's not surprising. But those lads, those 11 there, must have played through with some injuries and some knocks and loss of form to keep that season going right to the end. But anyway, we should unravel that as we go along.
Indeed. And of course, we have not only the appearance leaders, but the goal leaders. And Roy, you touched on the contributions from David Hurd and John Connolly earlier. Of course, Dennis Law, an incredible tally. I think we saw that Law had played 36 games, 28 league goals in 36 games, just incredible. And of course, Bobby Charlton and George Best chipping in with 32 goals between them. So just an incredible, we kind of mentioned it earlier, but incredible.
Just look at that forward line, how they all contributed. And
goals that, as we'll see at the end of the season, prove pivotal for the final reckoning.
Yeah.
Indeed. Right. So that's the key contributors, the appearance leaders, as well as the goals scored that season. And with that, the way we're going to tackle this season is we've broken it down into phases, or broken it down into groups of games, if you will. And so we're going to move now into phase one with Roger taking us through phase one from August 22nd, 1964 to September 8th, 1964.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. And well, I think we all look forward to the opening day of the season, don't we? I think as we've touched on, John Connolly had come from Burnley. Strangely, he'd been pushed out the Burnley side by Willie Morgan, who would become a United great in years to come. West Bromwich Albion were the visitors to Old Trafford, and another entertaining game, a 2-2 draw. Albion themselves had a disappointing season, finishing 14th. They were mid-table the season before, so United fans would have been very disappointed, really, to have started the season with a home draw. Only 2 points for a win in these days. Basically, the adage was, if you win your home games and draw away, you had a good shout at the league. The 22nd of August actually will go down in football history as quite a famous day, because that was the first edition of Match of the Day that featured Liverpool and Arsenal, and actually went on BBC Two in preparation for the World Cup that was coming a year or two later. It was actually on BBC Two though, because BBC Two actually had an HD picture. It was higher quality picture than BBC One. So that didn't feature United, unfortunately. United then, though, went away to Upton Park, where they featured a really interesting game against West Ham. Unfortunately, it was a 3-1 defeat, and bad memories for United supporters there, because West Ham had knocked United out of the FA Cup at the semi-final stage the previous season. West Ham were actually a more than decent side, to be fair. They were managed by the would-be England manager Ron Greenwood, and actually they won the European Cup Winners' Cup in this season. So no absolute disgrace in defeat at West Ham. We've had one or two other famous defeats at West Ham down the years as well that have cost us. A decent side though for West Ham, featuring Martin Peters, Jeff Hurst, and of course England's captain Bobby Moore. So next up for United was another scoring draw, this time against Leicester. Dennis Law scoring, though, for the third time, for the third successive game, and David Sadler also on the team sheet for that one. Strangely, and I don't know why this happens, perhaps you lads can tell me, how come we played West Ham so soon? Was that just down to the fixture computer?
It was a regular occurrence in the early month or 6 weeks of the season. We play Everton twice very soon as well in this particular season. Home and away.
It's something that you just don't see these days. Anyway, so featuring West Ham, we'd lost, and then we'd moved on to another disappointing game, this time a trip to Craven Cottage and another 2-1 defeat, although John Connolly made the scoring sheet for the first time in a promising start there. Next up, as Roy just alluded to there, United travelled to Goodison Park to face Everton, who were a decent side, of course, in the 60s. Over 60,000 there, and that saw Connolly, Hurd and Dennis Law score again. Everton had actually won the league in 1963, and it's quite interesting just how much of the honours were actually shared around the decent sides of the day. Some stats for you about the start to this season. It was actually United's worst start to a title-winning season, and they only picked up 41% of the points that were available, and only, in fact, the 2003 season when Sir Alex won the title comes close to that. So a really disappointing start. So only one win in the first 6 games for United, and it had to get better. Worth saying that in these days, it wasn't down to goal difference, it was down to goal average. And what's really interesting, looking around the fixtures across the whole of the division, loads of teams, scored a heap of goals, but they also let in a whole heap of goals as well. Pat Crerand came to United to help shore things up, and I'm sure you guys have got some particularly good memories of Paddy.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I was going to say, Roy, I think that's a good segue into phase 2, the way Roger left it off with Pat Kearns coming into the side and the turnaround that happened, and maybe you could just speak to his involvement in that in your phase.
Yeah, well, Pat arrived in the 62-3 season, so this was his second year. It was another Pat who arrived in this season. The Everton game, I actually went to the Everton game at Goodison. Raucous atmosphere as normal. I think we were 2-0 up after about 6 minutes. And it was a great game, 3-3. And we threw in Pat Dunn, a guy we'd signed from it was an Irish. I can't remember now whether. I know he finished up at Plymouth. I think we signed him from an Irish side, and he played as an amateur, I think, at Everton, and then he finished up in Ireland. Pat Dunn made his debut in the 3-3 game, but the big difference to me was the arrival of Nobby Stiles, and what a big difference he made this season. Maurice Setters had been partnering Billy Fawkes, but Matt made a big change. And Nobby was in, and Setters was away by November. I mean, I heard a story that there was a right rumpus in the game at West Ham when we got beat 3-1, and Matt didn't like Maurice Setters' attitude at all, and that was the death knell for Maurice. And by November, he was on his way to Stoke City. From the 17th of, from the 12th of September to December the 2nd, you can see there 14 matches, 13 victories. And it's like Pete alluded to before about Ten Hag, winning is important. Nowadays, 3 points, you draw 2 games, you might as well win 1 and lose 1. But 13 victories, and I'll come to the draw because that's a very interesting story. But Notts Forest came along. Everton, I think, was a pivotal game for the return game. Another quick return game there, Roger. within a week, 2 weeks. Everton at home, a packed house, 2-1, then a win away. Always Impos wins away. And I think I should just step aside 1 minute here because the whole stadium against the great Tottenham Hotspur stopped and applauded as a young man made his entrance into our great stadium that day. And we're very lucky to have him with us today. So I think he should take this story up. Mr. Molyneux.
Well, he's very kind. And it was my first team game, 26th of September, 1964. I remember it as if it was yesterday. It sticks in my mind like a birthday or an anniversary. I've seen the youth team the year before. That was magic enough. But to go to a ground where there's 50-odd thousand in and be gripped by the atmosphere and the magic that was on the field, it's never left me, thank God. I hope it never does. But yeah, that was my first game. Tottenham Hotspur, who a few years before that had won the double, but they still had Greaves and they still had and they had Gilsey and they had some great players. But it was just the magic of being at Old Trafford, from walking down from the car down Trafford Road, across Trafford Bridge, seeing the stadium, hearing the noise, smelling the smells, the stuff we all probably remember our first match. But it just really gripped me, and we won 4-1. Law got 2, and strangely, Paddy Credden got 2. He didn't get many goals, Paddy, but he got 2 that day. But I'd been nagging me parents to take me. My dad thought I was too small. My mum definitely didn't want me to go. And then one day, that day, she said I could go. And yeah, I'll never forget it. And my life would have been very different if she'd have said no, I guess.
Whereabouts did you go, Pete? Did you stand or sit?
Oh, you stood in those days mainly. Only the great and the good sat. Roy will have sat.
No, United Road.
I was on the pad at the United Road. Yeah, the United Road. It'd be somewhere where the cantilever is now. It was high up. And I remember my dad wanted to get us in front of a crash barrier, so you're not pushed down by the crowd onto crash barriers. And we managed to get in front of a crash barrier, and I think he sat me on the crash barrier. So yeah, it was somewhere on United Road, probably not that far from where I sit now in J Stand, but just magic. And I think after that, sorry to bore you a little bit, but I only missed 5 matches from then until 1967 for 3 years, when my dad couldn't take me. And then after that, when I could go under my own steam, I didn't miss one home game. For 18 years, I went without missing a single home game. So it really did grip me. I do sense that I became addicted to it. Probably, maybe a little too much, but that's for another day. But just bitten by the bug that is football, that is Manchester United, and that was the magic of United in the 60s. That was something very special.
And with that Tottenham victory, we actually moved through the gears, and we moved up to 5th after the Tottenham game in September. And then we went to play Chelsea away midweek at Stamford Bridge. And of course, George, even though he's still very young, he really loved the King's Road, and he loved Chelsea, and that was another massive game. Because Chelsea under Tommy Docherty, great young side, Ron Harris, Peter Osgood, he had some great players, McCready, and Docherty certainly got a young side playing brilliantly. But we went there, a magnificent game, thousands locked out, 60-odd thousand in, and we won 2-0. And Best was quite outstanding. He scored one and he made the other for Dennis Law. That was on the Wednesday, and then on the Saturday we dropped our only point in those 14 games, and it was a match away at Burnley. And of course, a lot of people today would be staggered about what I'm going to say now, but on that day, England played away against Northern Ireland in Belfast, and George was picked for Northern Ireland, and Bobby was picked for England. So of course they missed the game at Burnley. The Football League carried on, and the international match took place at 3:00 on the same afternoon as the league games. So we were without both Bobby and George, and I suppose 0-0 would be a good point for us there at Burnley on that day. But we're in gear. There's no question. 13 wins out of 14, and as we move through the matches, Aston Villa at home, a 7-0 victory. Wow, and Dennis scoring 4. Completely in his pomp, absolutely in his pomp. And you look at the games there. Chelsea away, Burnley away. Sunderland, I think that should be a home actually. I've got a feeling that was at home. Might be wrong, my mistake. But we were really in the pomp. And then to go to Liverpool, who were the champions, and absolutely marmalised them 2-0. I can't stress enough how well we played. And another goal for Pat Creran there, Pete, at Anfield. But what a great win. And that really, United then, well, we're looking as though we're going to be one of the teams. And in effect, those top 3 sides would be the 3 sides that chased all season. The Blackpool game away, I keep using the word pivotal here, but these are big moments. The Blackpool game away, Dennis had a bit of a contretemps with a very fiery, red-haired little winger called Alan Ball, and for some reason managed to get himself sent off. But he worked out that that would secure him a trip back to Aberdeen for Christmas and the New Year, which he seemed to make a habit of doing around that time. But United won 2-1, and then we went to the Arsenal a week or so after and won 3-2 at Arsenal. Played some absolutely glorious football, and we were on good run in the Intercity Spare Cup, which I know you'll come to later on. But United were playing some magnificent football at that time.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Roy. Well, before we get to phase 4 and a strange dip in form that seemed to hit United over the festive period and into the new year, we're going to come to you, Pete, for a game at least a rivalry that was brewing and that certainly came to boil on December 5th of 1964 in a small team called Leeds United.
Well, yeah, a small team in name and had been a small team up to that point. The great run ended, that great run that turned things around that Roy's alluded to there, winning games, scoring goals for fun, we tightened up the defence, came to an end on the 5th of December 1964. We could just gloss over that setback, but I just wanted to press the pause button here, because that fixture with Leeds was the beginning of a bitter rivalry that exists to this day. We said it's 60 years we've moved on now. The Damned United, they got called by Brian Clough. Leeds weren't founded until 1920. I think there's a team called Leeds City that went out of existence in the early part of the 20th century, but Leeds were formed in 1920. They never, for the next 40 years, troubled England's top honours at all. They were just a lower league team. But in 1961, an ex-City player, Don Revie, had taken over what was a struggling second-tier outfit. They were on the verge of going down to the third tier. Don Revie, very much a tactical person, so a good player to turn into a manager, but he was a wee bit obsessive. But he turned them round within a couple of years, and they won promotion to the top flight in the May of '64. So this was their first season in the top flight for some time. And in those early weeks, there was reports of Leeds being a bit of a rough team, but they were getting results, and they were up there near the top with United and, Roy said, Tommy Dock's Chelsea. So when we met Leeds at Misty Old Trafford on the 5th of December, it was a bit of the top of the table clash, and we were all up for it. Leeds would win by a single goal, but we saw firsthand that day some of the the evidence of the rough team that we'd heard about. It was more than rough. It was thuggery. It was gamesmanship. It was sly off the ball incidents, and it lasted throughout the 90 minutes. Any creative players like Best and Lauren Kennelly were targeted for fouls constantly, but they were very clever, if you like, with it. Leeds, very clever, very devious. They spread those fouls throughout the team, so people hardly got booked or sent off. But United were no soft touch. They could handle themselves. They had some tough players in there. But Leeds' approach, it was a scar on the beautiful game. And Revy's approach was win at all costs. And over the next few seasons, certainly we went head to head. And United I always thought were the beauty of the 60s, and Leeds were very much the beast. Jim Story, one of the players that Revy had in the team at that time, later said that Revy used to say to them, anyone that beats you at home, they need to know they've really been in a game. So nothing wrong with that. But he said that the Leeds players tended to take that a bit too literally, and it became an offence for an opponent to even get near the 18-yard line. He said they became a bit over-exuberant. And Don Revy just said, don't worry about all the bad publicity you're getting. What matters is that they're talking about you. There's a lot of that Fergie had put into his teams, and Busby had put into his teams, and other managers, Clough. But there's a line you cross, and Leeds crossed it regularly, where it turned into what was very ugly. Anyway, it lasted. Leeds were like that for 10 years till Revy left for the England job, and the bitterness between certainly United and Leeds has lasted for 6 decades. It wasn't just against United who were like this. Who were like this in most of their games. So United weren't alone in their dislike of Leeds United. But because of the close proximity, I think geographically, it really did become a running battle on and off the pitch with Leeds. And that's where it started, 5th of December. But let's move on. United pulled it back. Oh, no, they didn't pull it back after that. We struggled for a little bit. It put us into a bit of a wobble, Tim.
Indeed, it did.
Roy. Maybe Roy's got a story about his experience of the Leeds game. I don't know.
Yeah, I would say. Sorry, Tim, if I can just dive in on this, or Roger, who was next. In later years, early 1980s, I interviewed a famous referee called Jim Finney from Hereford, who happened to be the referee at this infamous United and Leeds game in December 1964. And he told me about the particular game where Bobby Collins, who of course was a Scottish teammate of Dennis Law and Pat Clearing, but Bobby Collins was a master footballer, a really, really good footballer. But he was a dirty so-and-so. He really was. He knew all the tricks. I just diverse slightly here because I also met Johnny Giles in later life. And Johnny Giles said to me that Bobby Collins taught him everything because Giles had broke his leg playing for United against Birmingham in the early 60s. And Bobby Collins said to him, you get him first, wherever you are. And he said Collins had this dark arts down to the line. And in the first half, he really assaulted. If you imagine Andy Carroll last night, well, this was Bobby Collins with Georgie Best for about 40 minutes, using him as a rag doll. So much so that Finney said, and I thought, well, they're not talking about me. I'll go to my dressing room. But he said Nobby Stiles really had a go physically with Collins in the tunnel at half time. He said, about looking after George. But the real story is that Collins then got the goal. About 15, 20 minutes to go. It was a really typical Salford, Manchester day. There was fog about. Don't forget, you got the canal just over Trafford Bridge that Pete mentioned. Is walking over there. So you got the water, but you got the steam trains that used to come along to pick people up after the game. And with about 15, 20 minutes to go, the steam trains came in. And Jim Finney said the smoke was coming up over the steam train, over the main stand. He said, I couldn't see. And it's fog, I just couldn't see. There was fog there to start with. Now I'd got the steam. So he had to take both teams off. And then he took both teams off. He said, immediately, Revy was there. Because don't forget, he went down the tunnel on the halfway line in those days. He said, Revy was there and the veins were sticking out in his neck. He was going epileptic about it. You can't do this. We're winning 1-0. You can't do it. He said, Matt just come up and had a cigarette and said, leave it with you, Jim, type of thing, So I left it about 10 minutes and anyhow, I just walked back onto the pitch. And this is a referee. Just as I'm walking back on the pitch, big policeman's hand come across me and said, "Oi, where are you going?" He said, he undid his raincoat. He said, "I'm the referee." And he just went back onto the pitch just to see if he could see from the halfway line. Sadly, from our point of view, he could, and the game resumed. But Pete was absolutely right. Pivotal moment. That must be the 32nd time I've said pivotal. I must learn how to spell it. But that was the Leeds Manchester United rivalry had arrived without a shadow of doubt. Sorry for whoever I interrupted.
No, it's good. I wonder if any of our Leeds friends will watch us. I think they know what their team was like, but anyway, good stuff.
Tremendous stories. That's what really makes this podcast, is having you guys here that lived through the season that can just add these stories to the season is just incredible. Right, December 5th. So Leeds game aside, United go on a poor run of form here from December to February 24th. United were 3 points ahead of Chelsea and 4 ahead of Leeds at the start of December. Roy, I think you touched on earlier Dennis Law's sending off against Blackpool, a game that United won 2-1. Yes. So Law was suspended for 4 weeks. He missed 6 matches from December 12th to January 16th. We touched on the fact that bans were in weeks back then, not games. To that point, Law had scored 18 goals in 20 games and plus 5 in Europe when the ban began. And so whether it was, certainly I'm sure Law's goals had an impact, whether that was the Leeds defeat that sent them down the spiral, or whether it was both to blame for the wobble. But United played 10 matches, as you can see. They only won 2 of those games, drew 5 and lost 2, and particularly the home form really let them down with the 1-1 draw to Birmingham City, the game against Sheffield United at home, which they were able to win, but then the draw against Stoke City, and certainly against Burnley at home. So the home form sort of let them down a bit at home during that period. They were lucky that 2 of the games when Law was banned were postponed due to weather. Fulham and Leicester both at Old Trafford. And compensation for Law was at Christmas. He was actually named European Footballer of the Year for the previous season. So a bit of a reprieve there, a bit of something for Law to be happy for. The first Brit to be named European Footballer of the Year since Sam Matthews in 1956. So by February 24th, United trailed Leeds and Chelsea in third place. Chelsea in first at that point, I believe. Right, Pete? Am I correct in saying that Chelsea would have been top of the table, or would have been Leeds at that point?
On the day we played Chelsea.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, Tim. I'm not
Chelsea
would have been 1-2. Chelsea were top.
Yeah. Chelsea were top, Leeds second, and United third.
Yeah. Certainly worrying, but form worrying with 30 of the 42 games played. So we've played 30 games at that point, 12 games left. The cup competitions did bring some solace, which we'll see. But certainly worrying form heading into the final phase of that season. United had some joy in the Intercity Ferris Cup. They beat Everton over the 2 legs. And certainly in the FA Cup, which Roger will come to, with victories over Chester, Stoke, and Burnley. So still in it in 3 competitions, but certainly the form was a bit worrying. And that brings us to the final phase of the season for Roy and Pete, where thankfully United were able to find some form and turn it around. So if you both could take us through the penultimate into United's first championship since Munich.
Well, just as the bad run of form had started, inexplicably, the good run started, and it really was needed, and it was an incredible run. It's what you call the running now, but it's. I'm not going through every game because there's 11 games there, and you can see, people can see the results themselves. But in those 11 games, United won 10 and lost 1. The one they lost was the last game, and it didn't matter. They would have had to lose that game 19-0 for Leeds to have taken over United with goal average. So they won 10 games, actually blew the other 2 sides away. Mainly because they had a settled side. They were injury-free. The only changes were due to international call-ups. They were playing superb football as well again. It just clicked into place. If I had to pick one player out, it would actually be Nobby Stiles. Don't know if Roy agrees, but his form was superb through that. And he actually won his first under-23 cap in Feb 1965. 16 months later, he'd be a World Cup winner in the full England side. But the key matches, there's no doubt about it. Chelsea, it's Chelsea at Old Trafford. They came to Old Trafford. If Chelsea had beaten us that day in March, it would have left it a 2-horse race between Leeds and Chelsea, really. But United didn't just beat Chelsea; they blew them away 4-0. And Bestie had a field day. I was too young to know what a field day was in those days, but he just danced merrily and created goals and made goals and scored goals. So that was key. A 5-0 win away at Blackburn, 0-0 at half time, and then Busby must have just. Well, he wouldn't have given him he wouldn't have done the hair dryer treatment. He wasn't that type of guy. He could be tough, but he would have just said, lads, go out there and sort it out. And in the second half, Bobby Charlton got a hat trick. But I mentioned earlier the crux was at Easter. Easter Saturday was the 17th of April that year. United were playing away at Leeds, the return fixture from the Old Trafford game. But before that, Chelsea had gone to Blackpool that weekend to Burnley to play a fixture. But they'd gone to stay at Blackpool. In a nutshell, a lot of their players went out on the binge. Doherty found out and sent them home. And they lost 6-2 at Burnley. He took disciplinary action, but he threw away the last chance of the league title because Chelsea were out of it then. The same day, United went to Ellen Road and won in very, very windy conditions. I wasn't there. Roy might have gone. But Kennelly, a bobbling shot, beat Sprake, and United won an absolutely critical game. I mean, Roy's used pivotal there, but this was critical because if Leeds had won that game, they would have gone on to win the title. There was no doubt about that. But I'll pause there, Roy. I'll take it up to Easter where we've just beaten Leeds. There's a couple of 2 or 3 important games after that. Do you want to cover those?
Yeah. Just to reprise a little bit, Bobby got a hat-trick in the Blackburn game, Bobby Charlton. That was his 7th hat-trick. Sorry, that wasn't. He actually finished up with 7 hat-tricks in his United career. So, I mean, and I have to say, this particular year, I think was Bobby Charlton's best. It's a paintbrush statement, but I think this is Bobby Charlton's best year as a United footballer. He played in the number 8 role, not the 9, not the outside left, and he dictated midfield along with Creran, but he was magnificent. Had that beautiful glide, left to right, right to left, fearsome shot, glorious passing of the ball. and he got a hat-trick at Blackburn. And then we came, Pete mentioned it earlier doors, that, winning 4-2 at Birmingham around the Easter time. And I think we were 1-0 down. But we won there 4-2. Bestie had another great game. We came to 2 massive home matches where, the title, if we won them both, and it's Liverpool and Arsenal we're playing, we had every chance of winning the league title. Now, Liverpool, when we played them at home, they were actually going to be in the FA Cup final the week after against Leeds United, as it happened. And they weren't going to win the league. So in a lot of ways, they were, even though they generally are switched on for a game with United, but this wasn't life or death for them. And we won comfortably, although we had to make a big team change because David Hurd didn't play in this game, and Noel Campbell was played at centre forward as he had been at Birmingham. Noel was a great club man. He played left back. He even played outside left at one game, but he was a great left full back and a leader of men. But he played centre forward. But Dennis got a bit of a kicking. They might have took their eye off the fact that it was going to be the FA Cup final, but they didn't forget Dennis. We won 3-0, but there were real doubts that Dennis would play on the Monday night. Now, again, it will surprise a lot of people, but United played a lot of midweek fixtures on a Monday night in this era. A lot of games on a Monday night. And it was way before Sky, by the way, in television. But Monday night was their Wednesday night in a lot of times. And we were playing.
Roy, was that
to
I've always thought that Monday night particularly was the catch-up of games because of the competitions we were still in. They were trying to. There was more games postponed in those days, weren't we? We talked about a couple that Law didn't miss because they got postponed, but each year there was 2, 3, or 4 postponed over the winter. I thought that they were catching up because they played on the Saturday, like you say, against Liverpool, the Monday against Arsenal, and then on the Wednesday at Villa. So I guess it was fixture congestion, was it?
Well, it was in that particular week, but we did play a lot of games on the Monday night.
Right.
And Dennis was a real doubt. I know Ted Dalton, the old physio, was the old injection. And of course, in the end, you can fast forward 3 or 4 years. I mean, Dennis, when he missed the European Cup final in '68, knees was a perennial problem from around then. And of course, the technology was nowhere like it is today. And Dennis, they got him, they patched him up and got him fit. And I have to say, it was one of those moments that I'd been fortunate, very fortunate, to be there in 1956 when we beat Blackpool to settle the league. And I was there in 1957 over the 2 games over Easter when we beat Sunderland and Burnley to win the league. So this was my 3rd time to see them win the league. What year were we? 64. I was 17. So I was quite savvy with it in a way. But that particular night was really emotional. Really cold. Even though it was April, it was still chilly. But the floodlights was on, and there was some magic in the air. You just sensed something was going to happen. And we played magnificently, as champions should be. And we won 3-1, and the crowd were just wild and, over the barriers onto the pitch. And as Pete said, we would have had to have been beat 19-0 on the Wednesday at Aston Villa. And that was never going to happen. And United were the champions again. We didn't realise that there wouldn't be many more of those. There was another one coming up in 2 or 3 years' time. But a great season came to an end, really, football league-wise. But we won it on goal difference, and as you can see there, 26-9-7, exactly the same record as Leeds. But our goal difference was superb. So, and just talking about the season today, Nobby Stiles really was a main man this season because he made a massive difference to our defence. And I think we were talking beforehand, chaps, but I would throw another thing out there. That this forward line of Connolly, Charlton, Hurd, Law, and Best, you find me five Manchester United footballers in the peak of their form, all contributing. You'll do very well. And not that I was around, but historically wise, I can reel off the 1908 side, the 1948 side, the 1956 and 7 side, and then you Couples and whatever Hills of the Tommy Dock side, and then of course the Sir Alex reign. But those five forwards, Connolly, Charlton, Hurd, Law, and Best, were simply magnificent. With a big vote of thanks to Nobby Styles, I think.
Yeah, I would second that, Roy. Having witnessed it all as a kid, I think there was a critical thing about that thing where people might say, "Why did we have to lose 19-0 at Aston Villa?" In those days, and we've touched on it, it was goal average that decided league position places, not goal difference as it does now. And so they divided your goals against into your goals scored. So to do well in the league, obviously you have to score a lot of goals and concede as few as you can. Leeds, Chelsea, and United all scored into the 80s that season, but we conceded only 39. And it's another factor of Busby's genius, I think, that as we've all said, those five forwards were brilliant. You could see those people that saw the brilliance of those five forwards: Kennelly, Hurd, Law, Charlton, Best. But the figures back it up. But that defence, which is often unsung in that season particularly, only conceding 39 goals, less than one a game, when, as Roger said earlier, there was a lot more goals about in the game then in all the divisions. It got a really strong defence together, Busby, and a superb attack. It was the perfect combination, wasn't it? And you never hear people mention Pat Dunn and Tony Dunn much, Shea Brennan, and Bill Folkes, for example. We've not touched on him much, but they were real stalwarts at the back, and the glitter, the magic dust was all up front. But without that defence that season, we probably wouldn't have won the league on goal difference, I think. Sorry, on goal average.
Indeed. Well, it's a successful league campaign, certainly. As we said, the first title since Munich. But there was still other competitions, of course, going on that season and games being played. And Roger, will come to you for the FA Cup run.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think for many people, the FA Cup, particularly the final, is still the biggest day in the football calendar. I watched it regardless of the teams, with my grandparents and things like that. And that was in the 70s. So, in the 60s, it would have probably been even bigger. And the crowds that United drew, even for the lesser teams, were still massive. So, for example, Chester City at home in the third round, that drew over 40,000 people. And then obviously in the later rounds, where we went away to Wolves, even Wolves packed in 53,000 inside Molineux. So the FA Cup, really was still a very special competition. Bear in mind, United had won the cup in '63, and they'd lost a semi-final against West Ham in '64 at Hillsborough on another of those famous Hillsborough pitches. So United really did want to get back to Wembley and get another trophy. So they beat Chester 2-1, as the slide says. George Best and Albert Kinsley, the scorers there. And then basically away at the Victoria Ground, they managed 50,000 people inside the Victoria Ground, Stoke. So the Kop at one end of the ground, I seem to remember being huge. But you just don't associate Stoke City with a 50,000 capacity and crown. But that's what Manchester United brought to the FA Cup. Eventually, David Hurd broke the deadlock in the replay. So that saw United up against a local derby against Burnley. And that was a tight affair, United winning 2-1 on that day, courtesy of goals from Paddy Crerand and Dennis Law again. Wolves at Molineux, as I was saying, 53,000 people there. So 2 more for Dennis Law, 1 for George Best, Crerand and Hurd again. But the 2 games I really want to talk about with you guys, particularly Roy and Pete, are the games against Leeds, because obviously Leeds had sort of come from nowhere, and Don Revie, as we've said, was this disciplinarian, and they very nearly did the double. And the first game at Hillsborough ended pretty famously, and I think in a bit of a scrap. Did either of you witness that?
I went to the replay actually at Notts Forest on the Wednesday night. I didn't go to the 0-0 at Leeds, but obviously Tim put some very graphic pictures up early doors, where again Mr. Bobby Collins was involved, and 1 or 2 others. But and what also came about from those pitches that Tim put up was the state of the Hillsborough pitch, which wasn't alone. But I mean, you just look at it now, and it literally was a paddy pit. I mean, it literally was a pitch that was just full of mud. United, as we've mentioned with the league game at Old Trafford, we look at state of that. We took umbrage about losing that game, and I think we were going to make sure that we were on the front foot this time, and that there was going to be no disturbances to our players, and we were going to be putting ourselves forward. But I've got memories of the replay.
Yeah, well, the replay quite famous, and it was tight right until the very end, and almost with the last kick of the game, there was a free kick which former United man Johnny Giles took, and it was literally route 1, and it went all the way into the penalty area where Billy Bremner backheaded it into the net, and that settled the tie, and United were out. And I think Pete was telling me United had reached 4 successive semi-finals in that period, equaling Newcastle's record from the early 1900s. So unfortunately, that meant any chances of the double United had were gone. But it is, you can actually see this goal online. It really is some goal to win a football game, and it must have cut the atmosphere completely dead. It also seems quite strange to be playing a semi-final replay at Nottingham Forest. It's not the biggest ground in the. They did manage 46,000 in there for the replay. I worked with a guy, a United fan, and he was saying the weather was really bad on that night. I think, is that true?
Yeah, it was, and I was at the end where the River Trent was behind, and of course, again, you're talking 1964 motorways. I mean, what a horrible journey that was on that night. We got beaten in the semi-final of the cup, 1-0 in the last minute, and then had to traipse our way back to Manchester. So it wasn't a great trip. It wasn't a great trip.
And
we actually played very well. I thought we played very well in that game, and we were the better side actually.
So that wrapped up the FA Cup for United, and Leeds and Liverpool actually fought out the final. Neither of those sides had won the FA Cup before, and Liverpool won their first trophy in the FA Cup in 1965.
Nice one, Roger. Right, and into the final phase of the season, and another cup competition, the Inter Cities Fair Cup. Affairs Cup run, and you can see two-legged affairs for each of the games. United knocked out Djurgården, Swedish side. You can see a massive second leg victory there. They then went through Dortmund and saw Dortmund beat Everton in that tricky the dip in form in the league period that we saw. Dispatched Everton, and then through Strasbourg through 2 legs, and then it was in the quarterfinal, and then into the semifinal against Hungarian side Ferencváros, and you can see there through the 2 legs, honors even, United winning 3-2 at Old Trafford, and then on June 6th, winning this or losing the second leg 2-1. Interestingly, the league finished on April 28th, and the first leg of the semifinal wasn't played until May 31st. So whether it was maybe a bit of a fatigue for United in that second leg, it was a long season. The second leg being played June 6th. We saw the volume of games. So remember, whether it was fatigue that set in or not, there was a toss-up for the sort of the third leg, if you will, or the replay of the semifinal after the 2 legs. And the Hungarians won the toss-up. So the game was in Budapest on June 16th, and United lost that game. So certainly, a long season, as we said. United making it to the semifinals of both cup competitions, which successful run in itself, and ultimately losing out in the semifinal in both of those competitions.
Yeah, Tim, can you just put some of the scores up there again? I can just give
Sure.
you a little bit of bring a little bit of it to just a couple of points, really.
Yep.
First of all, the Intercity Spares Cup, it had a difficult birth. The European Cup didn't in the early 50s. The Intercity Spares Cup came soon after. It was literally a competition designed to foster commercial business. A Fairs Cup meant that there was a business fair in, say, Birmingham and in Strasbourg, and they arrange a match around it. Does that make sense? So that's
Yes.
how what is now the Europa League came about, and it's been called the Intercity Fairs Cup, the Fairs Cup, the Europa League. But the first season in the 60s, London used to go in. Birmingham would go in. A city had to go in, not just a football team. So just a bit of background there. And it wasn't until it got to about 63, 64, it started sorting itself out that it was actually league teams from the top flight in every country. Those teams that hadn't qualified for the European Cup or the Cup Winners' Cup, 2 or 3 sides from each country went in. So it was a bit it was a bit of a runt of the litter in terms of European competitions. But United were taking it seriously by the time it came to 64, 65, because Busby believes so much in United playing against not just the country's best, but the continent's best. But, for example, that 6-1 victory over Dortmund, that was in Dortmund. So we won 6-1 away and 4-0 at home. The Everton game, the first time in our history we played a team from the same country, that was quite rare in those days. And Everton got knocked out in that round. The round before, they'd played Kilmarnock and beaten them. So they didn't have a very exciting European adventure, Everton fans. Scotland and Manchester they travelled to. Strasbourg, again, 5-0 was the away leg. United won 5-0 in Strasbourg, and then a bit of a dampener, the 0-0 at home. But Ferencváros had won the Olympic title in the Tokyo Olympics in 1964. So they did have a very good side. And they had a guy called Florian Albert, who starred for Hungary in the 66 World Cup a couple of years after this. We should explain that there was no penalties in those days. If there was a draw over 2 legs and away goals didn't count double in those days either, you just played a third game. And as you alluded to, Tim, you tossed up for where that was. It was either in your home ground or in the other country, the other team's country. And we lost the toss-up and lost. And I think you're right. We were then into middle of June from an August start, Tim. The side was weary. Those 11 lads that had played in most of the games were weary. It was the latest Manchester United had ever played a competitive game in a season, 16th of June. And they never played one again that late until the pandemic of 2020, when Project Restart meant that in June 2020, they got to deal with the last 10 or 11 games of that season that were struck down by the pandemic. So for many years, it remained the latest we'd ever played a game. Not that matters much, but shame we couldn't get to the final, which I think, Roy, tell us what happened in the final. What did Ferencváros do?
I mean, Ferencváros were a very, very good side. Pete mentioned there that Hungary had won the Olympic situation. And in as I say, Florian Albert and Fenerbahce, the winger, they were a really good side. And we were 3-1 up at home, and they scored a late goal and then beat us 1-0, which was decisive. Then they won the toss, so we had to go to Budapest and lost 2-1. And by this time, I think you said it was June the 16th, the final still had to be played. And Juventus were the other side in the final. And the authorities decided to play it as a one-legged final. So there was another toss-up to decide whether it would be in Turin or Budapest. And Juventus won that toss, and the final was played in Turin. And Ferencváros went there and won 1-0 and won the cup. They were a really decent side. And I can only believe that, as you've alluded to there, that time gap between the season ending April 28th, whatever. We played the 2 Strasbourg games after that, by the way. But then we were waiting till the end of May and then into June. And I really do think that didn't help the flow. But Ferencváros were a really great side.
Good stuff from both of you again, Pete and Roy. And right, that's the season in a nutshell, but more than a nutshell, I suppose. We've covered in quite a lot of detail. But if we look at an overview of the season, we talked on the impact that obviously the forward line made, and we know about the goals certainly from Hurd and Connolly. But George Bestlaw and Charlton, the Holy Trinity, Best making 17 appearances the season before. So this is really his first full season, I suppose you'd say, with United. If correct me if I need correcting there, Pete and Roy, but the impact that they made, scoring 71 goals, 50% of the 139, 51% of the 139 goals United scored in all competitions, really was the cherry on the cake. As you guys alluded to earlier, it was a tremendous team, but to have those 3 who would go on to win European Footballer of the Year, each of them within, was it I believe a 6-year period, Pete, if I'm correct, or was it
4 years?
4-year period. Yeah. So tremendous stuff from them. And then of course the appearance leaders again to finish off.
That's a really interesting point there, Tim. 3 of the 4 at the top, Brennan, Dunn, and Folks, we've hardly mentioned. I mean, played all 60 games. And John Connolly in his first season, 60 games. I mean, it's quite incredible. I mean, Dennis would have had at least another 4 on top of that, by the way, because of his walkabout, his suspension. But I mean, you show that there's the 11 players who played. Look at those cup. And Dennis would miss the Chester game in the FA Cup, I think. The Intercity Spurs Cup, I think it was one of the Everton games. He might have missed on that. It's quite incredible. It's quite incredible. But it did, in the end, it would do for us, wouldn't it? Because the tiredness and everything just coming. That could easily have been a treble. Could easily have been a treble.
And if you think there was 11 games there, I think, Tim, it showed in the Intercities Fairs Cup. First of all, look at the number of goals we scored in that. Sorry, I'm probably taking you between two slides there. In the Fairs Cup, five players there scored 14, 19, 27, 29 goals.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's incredible. But I just think picking up on Roy's point about them being tired. We mentioned being tired because they'd won the league, a small squad, small but beautifully formed squad. But in those 11 UEFA Cup games, 6 of them away, obviously. I know one was only at Everton. But imagine the travelling as well in those days. Ferencváros that they went to twice in 10 days, behind the Iron Curtain then. That was no picnic. And just the travelling around on coaches and trains in those days was a lot different to now. But you know, and then you touched on the Holy Trinity there, Tim, and they get mentioned a lot. And you see actually about half a dozen televised goals of George Best and Dennis Law and Bobby Charlton. But sometimes I think I like to try and bring them alive, and if I could just bring them alive to whoever watches this, I think the three main qualities, the three of them were very different. They were all brilliant footballers, Best, Law and Charlton, but in that season particularly, Dennis Law's reflexes at picking up loose balls that the goalie spilled, or just getting in the box and putting a ball away from 2 yards or 10 yards. He had incredible reflexes, lightning reflexes. His ability to climb for a guy that was only about 5'10" and hang in the air to head a ball home accurately was superb. His speed, his passing was superb. That was just Dennis Law. Georgie Best with his dribbling, he could tie people in knots, but then invariably it ended up with a good pass, setting up Law or Hurd or Charlton or Kennelly. And Bobby Charlton, Roy's always mentioned, he reckoned that was one of Bobby's best seasons. He was coming to his peak as a midfield player. His running, his passing, his shooting was phenomenal. You could see goals against Tottenham in the Charity Shield if you want to see some special goals. But there was far more than what you just see on the clips nowadays on YouTube. So much that those players did that was magical to watch. And if you witnessed it, if you bore witness to it, it'd take your breath away. And when they were all on form, they were unplayable. Teams couldn't live with them, you know. So it was a real joy. And for a young lad seeing that, I just count myself lucky to have been born into that era where when I started 1964, those next 4 years were absolutely unbelievable. 2 league titles, all those semi-finals of FA Cup and European Cup, and then to get to the Everest of football in '68 and win the European Cup. And you know what? I think we touched on this, that was United's first league title since Munich. We shouldn't always reference Munich, but it is a critical part of United's history because it would have devastated most other clubs. That was our first league title since 1957. It was important when Busby was getting the energy and the desire back to carry on after Munich, that he wanted to win the title again and win in Europe for those players that got injured or passed away at Munich. And he completed the first part of that task in that season we've just covered by winning, taking United back to the pinnacle of English football. And his job was finally done 4 years later when he took him to the top of European football. I say this whenever we talk about United and Europe, the first English team to win the European Cup. It was incredible. And that was a real milestone, 64, 65.
I do believe that, you know, being pedantic, I mean, the 68 side, 99 side, if you go back to the 68 side, that 64-5 side that we've just discussed fully, and then the following March going to Lisbon to win 5-1 against Benfica.
Yeah.
You know, in a way, they'd actually peaked by 68, hadn't they? Dennis wasn't fit. You know, Georgie was much more the ringmaster as well of the team. But the 64-5 and then that year we won 5-1 in Benfica were probably better sides and actually won the European Cup in 68.
Yeah.
Indeed, what a season. Roger, we'll come to you for the final word before we sign off here on our 64-65 season. Well, I think you're on mute there, Roger.
How disappointed were you when John Connolly left, guys? Because he didn't stay very long, did he?
No, he was 2-3 year wandering away. I think Matt had seen John Aston, by the way. I think he was giving John Aston a real chance. I think that was one of the reasons. But of course, Connolly again was in the England World Cup squad of 1966 and actually played the game.
Played against Uruguay, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, was that the first game? The first game.
Yeah.
The first game. Yeah. He was a great player. I mean, we signed him. He was a mature player. I think Pete had mentioned he'd won the league title with Burnley. He was a bloody good player, a goal-scoring winger who could actually use his right foot, which might get us into too many conversations if we talk about Mr. Anthony. So perhaps I'll leave it there.
Let's think about Andre Kuchelski instead.
A right winger who can use his right foot.
Mm-hmm.
Who'd have thought?
Your question was that we were disappointed. I don't remember being disappointed. It was at the end of 66. Roy's right. Johnny Aston was coming through. He'd come through from that youth team of 64 or 63, 64. Jimmy Ryan was there as the right winger and had started to play in the league games and in the European Cup games from 66, 67, 68. He famously scored against Gornick in that run to the European final. So I think Busby wanted to put faith in his youth. John Kennelly was getting on a little bit by then. He'd won a title with Burnley in 1960. So I think he was one of those guys that you buy for a short time. It does the trick like Abramovich did and maybe Weghorst will do. But United went on to win the league after Kennelly left in 66. Kennelly left. We won it in 67. So United fans weren't too despondent. I think we were just happy that he'd come and burst on the scene. Someone that disappeared a lot quicker, Pat Dunn, who came from Shamrock Rovers for £10,000 as cover for Gaskell and Gregg, played in every game after he went in at that Everton game at game 5 or game 6, Roy, in 64.
Yes, every game.
Played every match and won, and you thought we'd got a hero here in Pat Dunn. He was a good shot stopper, part of a very good defence. He only played 2 more games, and that was in 65, 66, the following season. We lost 5-1 at Blackpool in the League Cup and 5-1 at Tottenham in the league. And it was the end of Pat Dunn. His confidence just was shot in a way that, like Jim Leighton's was around 1990. And he faded away to Plymouth Argyle. But came on and burst onto the scene for 1 year and had an incredible season. Sometimes that just happens with title-winning sides where the others had more longevity.
Yeah, and then we signed Stepney, of course.
Yes.
Incredible, tremendous stuff, guys. And we've. Yeah, go ahead, Ray.
No, just great. Really enjoyed it.
You'll have to stop. You'll have to stop me and Roy. Tim. You'll have to stop.
We might have to do a part 2 to this episode. For people's listening pleasure, and we could. I'm sure we could all sit here all day and listen to it. I know I certainly could. Might need a pint or 2, but I'd be on to certainly be up to sitting here all day. But we really hope you enjoyed this one, folks, and please get in touch below. If you watch this video, you can reply through the video thread. Pete, Roger, Roy, myself will certainly enjoy engaging with people and sharing more of Pete and Roy's marvelous stories through the Twitter feed. But it's always great catching up with the 3 of you. Thank you all for your tremendous insight into that season. And we will see you on the next one, folks.
Thank you very much.